You scrolled past 3 ads before breakfast today. You didn't choose to see them, someone chose for you. And the person who figured out how to make you believe something without asking your permission didn't work in advertising. He worked for the government during a war 70 years before you were born. His name was Carl Hovland. In 1942, the U.S. Army hired him to solve a problem. New recruits didn't hate the enemy enough. They knew Germany and Japan were threats on paper, but paper doesn't make a man run toward gunfire. Hovland was a psychologist, not a soldier, and the Army handed him a stack of training films and one question. Would watching them actually change what a soldier believed? He tested it, rigorously, with control groups, the way you test a drug, and what he found rewired how governments talk to citizens for the rest of the century. The films barely changed how much recruits hated the enemy, but they changed something else, something quieter. They changed what recruits believed to be true about the war. Facts moved, feelings didn't. Sit with that for a second. You can hand someone information and shift their beliefs without ever touching their emotions. That's not persuasion the way you picture it, with a fired-up speech in a crowd. That's persuasion as engineering. And once the Army proved it worked, nobody put it back in the box. Here's where it gets stranger. Hovland noticed something else in his data. A message from a source people didn't trust still worked, eventually. It just took time. He called it the sleeper effect. People forget who told them something long before they forget what was told to them. A propaganda film from a source you distrusted at the time can still be shaping your opinion months later, once your brain has quietly filed away the message and thrown out the source tag. Think about how often that happens to you now. A headline you half dismissed in the moment. A claim from an account you rolled your eyes at. Weeks later, you find yourself repeating it as though it's just something you know. You didn't get persuaded, you got seeded. Hovland wasn't working alone. His team, funded directly by the War Department, published their full findings years later in a book called Experiments on Mass Communication. It sat mostly unread by the public, but every advertising department, every campaign strategist, and eventually every social media platform that hired a behavioral scientist built their playbook on the bones of that one wartime research project. You have never read it. You live inside its conclusions anyway. The Nazis understood a different half of this same machine, and they understood it earlier. Joseph Goebbels didn't run his propaganda ministry on facts. He ran it on repetition and on identity. Say a thing enough times, in enough places, from enough directions, and people stop asking whether it's true. They start asking whether everyone around them believes it. Goebbels had radios installed in German homes at subsidized prices for exactly this reason, not to inform people, to surround them. A message that reaches you once is an opinion. A message that reaches you from your radio, your newspaper, your child's school book, and your neighbor's conversation all in the same week stops feeling like an opinion. It starts feeling like weather. Something you live inside rather than something you evaluate. That's not a coincidence. It's the same mechanism a Polish-born social psychologist named Solomon Asch would later prove in a lab, using nothing more dangerous than a few lines drawn on cards. Asch ran his experiments in the 1950s, but he built them to explain what he just watched happen in Europe. He sat a real subject in a room with actors posing as fellow participants, and he asked a simple question. Which line matches this one? The answer was obvious, except the actors, one after another, gave the wrong answer on purpose. And roughly a third of the time, the real subject caved and agreed with the group, even though their own eyes told them otherwise. A third of the time. Over an answer you could check by looking, and it got worse the more actors he added, up to a point. Add just 3 or 4 confident wrong answers around a person, and their own trained eyes start losing the argument to the room. Now stretch that same pressure across years, across a whole nation, across neighbors and newspapers, and radios all saying the same thing at once. You start to understand how ordinary people, not monsters, signed off on horror. They weren't uniquely evil. They were watching lines on a card and everyone around them was calling the short one long. You'd like to think you're immune to that. Most people do. That's actually the most dangerous part of the whole system. And a Cornell psychologist named Robert Cialdini would spend decades mapping exactly why. Cialdini's research on influence, much of it built directly on lessons from wartime propaganda, found that the tactics working on you today aren't loud lies. They're small, structural nudges: scarcity, authority, social proof. The same forces Goebbels used with posters you now meet in your feed, minus the mustache and the swastika, dressed instead in a countdown timer or a stranger's five-star review. Cialdini called one of these levers social proof, and it's almost embarrassingly simple. People look at what other people are doing and they copy it, especially when they're uncertain. A restaurant with a line outside gets more customers than an empty one serving better food. A product with 10,000 five-star reviews earns your trust faster than a product with none, even if you never read a single review yourself. You're not weighing evidence in either case. You're counting bodies the same way Goebbels wanted the German public counting agreeing voices instead of checking facts. Nobody handed you a leaflet this morning telling you what to buy or who to blame. Nobody needed to. The leaflet got absorbed into the architecture of the platform you check first thing when you wake up. Wartime propaganda had to convince you it was true. Modern persuasion just has to make you feel like everyone already agrees, and your brain does the rest of the convincing for free. So why does this still work on you, specifically right now? Because your brain evolved for a small world. For most of human history, you lived in a group of maybe 150 people. If everyone around you believed something, it was usually smart to believe it too. Disagreeing with the whole tribe rarely paid off, and it sometimes got you left behind, alone, in a world with no hospitals and a lot of predators. Your instinct to trust the group wasn't a flaw, it was survival math. The problem is that instinct never got an update. Your brain still treats a trending hashtag the way your ancestors treated 150 people nodding around a fire. It can't tell the difference between organic consensus and a coordinated campaign built by someone who read Hovland's old army reports and knew exactly which buttons to press. The line on the card looks obvious. Everyone else is saying it's the long one. What are you supposed to do? Trust your own eyes. Add one more twist, because this is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. The more educated you are, the more confident you feel about your own resistance, and the worse that confidence tends to serve you. Researchers studying persuasion have repeatedly found that smart, informed people don't resist manipulation better. They just build more sophisticated justifications for beliefs they were nudged into in the first place. Intelligence doesn't inoculate you against propaganda. It just gives you better tools for defending the conclusion after the nudge has already landed. Consider what the Allies were doing on the other side of the same war. Britain's political warfare executive dropped millions of leaflets over occupied Europe, and American planes did the same over the Pacific, urging Japanese soldiers to surrender. Neither side believed a single leaflet would change a mind on its own. The strategy depended on repetition and timing, dropping the same message again and again until it stopped sounding like enemy noise and started sounding like something everyone already knew. Both sides of that war, fighting each other on every other front, agreed completely on one thing. Belief isn't built by a single strong argument. It's built by exposure, stacked over time, until the source disappears and only the message remains. That's exactly the shape of the algorithm deciding what you see before your first coffee. It doesn't need one brilliant argument to change your mind. It needs you to see a version of the same claim 4 times before lunch, from 4 accounts that feel unconnected, until the claim stops feeling like someone's argument and starts feeling like the ambient truth of the day. You call that being informed. Carl Hovland would have called it a delivery system. Here's the part almost nobody tells you, though. Hovland's own data included a way out. He found that people who were warned in advance, told directly that someone was about to try to persuade them, resisted the message far better than people who weren't warned. Just naming the attempt weakened it. Knowing you're a target changes how the message lands. This is sometimes called inoculation, and it works almost the same way a vaccine does. You don't build resistance to a persuasive tactic by avoiding it entirely. You build resistance by getting a small, clearly labeled dose of it in advance. So your mind has already met the shape of the argument before the real version shows up dressed as a friend's opinion or a trending post. Soldiers warned that a film was designed to persuade them, watched it more skeptically, and absorbed less of it wholesale. The warning didn't need to be dramatic. It just needed to exist. That's the whole reframe this video is asking you to make. You're not going to out-willpower propaganda, and you're not going to spot every manipulated headline on site. Nobody can. But you can do what those forewarned soldiers did in Hovland's studies. You can walk into your day already knowing the game is being played, already knowing that repetition is a tactic and not a truth serum, already knowing that a crowd agreeing with something is not the same as that something being real. You scrolled past 3 ads before breakfast today. This time you know exactly what they were built to do to you, and knowing that is the one thing 70 years of research says actually works.